Hello again, YouTube. Lovell Hawes, prior enlisted Marine, military history buff, and just overall somebody who does a lot of research. And for this particular history lesson, I'm going to start with a quote, and I'm going to give you guys a chance to guess at who you think it was. I wish I owned all the slaves in the South, for I would free them all to avoid it. The war. This was a gentleman who was lived before the war, who lived through the war, and died sometime after the war. Does I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to give me a guess as to who it was. Ready? Go. Okay. 10 seconds have elapsed. Who do you think it was? Sounds like somebody in the north, doesn't it? Well, it wasn't. Wait, somebody in the south? Couldn't have been somebody who actually fought. And had to have been a civilian or something. Somebody who owned a newspaper. No. No, 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 no. Had to be one of the women because they didn't have hardly any rights back then. No. This is gonna cause some of your brains to look like a mushroom cloud after Hiroshima. It was General Robert Edward Lee. That's right, Granny Lee. That was his nickname. Granny Lee was actually was very much an abolitionist. He was a veteran of the Spanish American War, and he'd actually seen battle in person before, and at the same time, he actually was in favor of granting freedom to the slaves. Although his wife did own slaves, and he did not force the issue there because, as far as he was concerned, it was her choice, not his. So you're probably wondering, okay, why did this guy happen to fight for the Confederacy? I mean, admittedly, the political leadership in the Confederacy was abhorrent. They were, quite a few of them were very, very much what we would consider a classic racist, and a lot of them were slave owners themselves. But your average Virginian didn't have any slaves. Your average Georgian didn't have any slaves. Your average Tennessean didn't have any slaves. The average Texan did not have them because they were very freaking expensive. And it's kind of like the equivalent of if you had four slaves, it was the equivalent of being able to afford a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. I don't know about you, but certainly can't afford a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. Way too expensive. So it's like saying that the Southerners were fighting for slavery one way or another. Your average Southerner was not. The Southern political leadership, that's a different matter. They definitely were. There was no bones about it. And General Lee, he was very much against the war altogether and was willing to accept abolition of slavery. But why did he fight for Virginia? Well, that goes back to a little something that happened back in the 19th century. If, say, the year was 1781, that would be the 18th century, the year that the United States was founded. If somebody had said, what country are you from? You look at them and go, I'm from Virginia. That was your country. The United States was more looked upon how we see the European Union today. If you happen to be looking at, say, Germany and asked a German where they're from, they'd say, Germany. If you ask them what country they're from, they'd say, Germany. Duh. Well, so, and if you asked them where in Germany, they might say nicht far von Frankfurt, nicht far von Stuttgart, uh, von Bremen. Just okay. But they would actually say they're from Germany. They're not from the European Union. The European Union isn't an official country. It is a coalition of countries who are working together. That was how the United States was seen in the 19th century, all the way up to 1865. So it was United States as bits and pieces. The United States are as a collective doing this, but they are not official. And similarly, it was shown to be that way amongst the United States troops. It's like if you were to say join the army in Virginia, you'd be in a Virginia Brigade. Actually, the First Virginia Brigade is the Stonewall Brigade, so that gives you an idea. Or if you happen to be from one of the northern states, like say New York, you'd be in a New York regiment, our brigade. I was like, yeah, in fact, yeah, so as a result, these units were specific to state to state to state. Similarly, it was actually seen by a lot of people in the South that if they didn't like what was going on with the United States, that they had the right to withdraw. So in a lot of ways, South Carolina was a lot more like Great Britain. Just different issues. So Great Britain is going, dude, I don't like what's going on with the European Union. So they're willing to say, you know what, I am out of here. Well, that's what South Carolina did. And granted, I don't agree with the reasons that the South Carolina political leadership did it, but that's how they saw it. Now, other states followed because they were just as aggrieved as South Carolina was, and when Abraham Lincoln put forth the idea of putting an army, or building an army to put what he saw as an illegitimate rebellion down, other states, including Virginia, actually left. Anyway, this is part of the reason why Abraham Lincoln waited until basically after the Battle of Antietam to do the Emancipation Proclamation, because he was afraid he was going to lose states like Maryland and some of the other states. And it's like, if you haven't looked at a map, if you take Virginia and Maryland, you're surrounding D.C., so automatically under siege here. Not good. So as a result, General Lee saw himself not as a soldier of the United States, not a federal soldier. He saw himself as a soldier of Virginia. So, at the time, a Virginia gentleman, as a soldier of Virginia, would do what Virginia does, and it was not his position to question it otherwise. He does not question his political leadership. The decision was made. He was an officer as a Virginia soldier, so Virginia seceded, and therefore so did he. And as one of his duties as a Virginia soldier was to fight Virginia's battles. And that meant he was fighting the United States as a result. That was not his choice as far as he was concerned. And similar was true of quite a few of the Confederate generals. It's like Jackson himself actually violated Virginia law to actually teach slaves how to read, specifically the Bible, because he was very much a God-fearing man. And he, like Lee, was considered himself a soldier of Virginia. So when Virginia seceded, so did he. It was Virginia was his country as far as he was concerned, and he was a soldier of his country. So whatever Virginia did, he was going to do. And that applied to both of these gentlemen. And I still use the term gentleman quite openly with these men because they were indeed gentlemen. It's like even after Lee had lost the war, after the war had been lost, and Lee was president of what has now become Washington and Lee University, he actually was asked if General Grant was to come to one of his get-togethers, what would he do? General Lee said, "I would extend every courtesy to the man." And there was also a case of where there was one northern lady who was at one of those parties who, she was pretty as pie, honestly, based on all the descriptions I've heard. But because she was a Yankee, using Southern slang around here, she wasn't getting very much attention from any of the Virginia gentlemen around her. So generally demonstrated that he was indeed a Virginia gentleman and asked her to dance. And this elderly gentleman was dancing with this young lady and one of the most respected men in all the South was dancing with this northern girl. After that, she was getting a lot more attention because General Lee showed them the way. He led by example. So, yeah, but at the same time, so there's also the question of why did he fight so hard? Well, that was what he was supposed to do. If he didn't believe in the cause, why did he fight so hard? Like I said, he Virginia officer. As far as he was concerned, his country was the Commonwealth of Virginia, not the United States of America. So, and it was his home. In fact, Arlington National Cemetery is built on the land that was once his home. He lost it. It was part of his recompense for being the commanding general of the opposing army. And that was his home. That is in Virginia. So, when it comes down to that, that's exactly what he's fighting for. He was fighting to be able to go back to his home and go back to seeing his wife, to go back to living his life how he would in time of peace. That was all he was fighting for. And so he would fight. It's like, for example, how many of you would fight tooth and nail over just somebody coming into your house and wanting to burn it to the ground? Yeah, there's quite a few of you who go, yeah, no, I'm going to put a boot print on their backside. And if you're not willing to do that for a loved one, I would honestly question whether or not you actually love that loved one. Your wife, your father, your mother, anybody, your brother, sister, any kids you might have. It's like if you're not willing to fight a little bit over family, then I'd question whether or not you actually love them. Generally, it was fighting for those very reasons. He wasn't fighting because he was a racist or anything. I think I've proven that by now. Now, General Lee was a brilliant tactician, and unfortunately not a very good communicator. And part of the reason that Jackson and Lee worked so well together was because of the fact that Jackson thought much like Lee does. So when Lee was giving rather general, vague orders, Jackson interpreted them exactly the way Lee meant for it to be interpreted. And yeah, it's like one of the biggest problems was the vagueness of the orders. It was that one thing that was actually shown was an example of it was in the movie Gettysburg, and this actually did happen, where General Lee said, "Get over to General Ewell and tell him to take that hill if possible." If possible. Oh, that's not what he meant. General Lee was very aggressive. He meant to take that hill at all cost. But he said, if possible. General Ewell, who was new to command at that point, did not think it was possible, so did not even attempt the attack. So General Ewell followed the orders to the best of his interpretation. And that proved to be a problem. It's like it's like General Lee. I'm not sure if he read The Art of War, but he obviously doesn't remember one part that sticks with me quite well. If the order is not clear and not followed, it is the fault of the commander, which he did take responsibility for quite a few of his failures. In fact, when Pickett's charge failed, he was known to, again at Gettysburg, he was actually known to apologize to his men, taking responsibility for the fact that the attack failed. It was his fault. And he was always like that. In defeat, he always took the blame himself. In victory, he always gave the honor and glory to his men. And that's another thing that would make General Lee a Virginia gentleman. And unfortunately, it seems like in this day and age, we have a incredible shortage of Virginia gentlemen, because because even after it was settled that the United States is a country, not a collective of countries, Virginia gentlemen have done quite a bit of good stuff since then. It was like Patton actually attended VMI. His father was one of the first captains of VMI, which is basically the summa cum laude of VMI. And his grandfather, a graduate of VMI, is died at one of the battles in Winchester during the same war where Lee was in command of the Army for Northern Virginia. I was like, so Patton has very deep roots in Virginia, as does MacArthur, who's buried in Norfolk. I was like, there's quite a bit said to some of our best people. In fact, I've actually been kind of thinking about working on a book that declares that Virginia is not for lovers, it's for warriors, because we've got a lot of them, and a lot of great ones, and a lot of the best ones that this country has had. And they have deep ties to it one way or another. It's like the most decorated Marine in history was born in Hampton, Virginia. Chesty Puller. every Marine who is watching this video is going, Chesty! Because we all know him. But generally, yeah, it's like there's a lot to be said about the man, but it's like there's fighting words if you call the man racist in front of me. And I'll throw on the thick southern accent for this one. You ain't gonna be calling General Lee a racist in front of me. That being said, I've been Lovell. You guys have been awesome. And I hope you guys are having a good day.